According to Matthew's gospel, that crowd that I read about a few moments ago, they were enthusiastically cheering with their palm frond pom-poms, very quickly morphs into a crowd with swords and sticks just a couple days later. Now, this seemed not to surprise Jesus, because he had just told them, all of you will betray me. Went on to say, woe to you, by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would be better for that one not to have been born. Now, Matthew goes on to indicate that all of the disciples rejected that prediction. They all said, never, I will die before I will betray you. In unison, probably, maybe even harmony. And yet, Matthew goes on to tell in chapter 26 and 27 the stories of how indeed every single one of Jesus' followers betrayed him, or abandoned him, or sold him out, in some kind of way turned their back on Jesus. Every one of them. How many of you got the notification to read Matthew 26 and 27 in preparation for worship today? That will help you very much. It's 120-some verses, so we're not going to try to read it all here today. But I invite you to open your Bibles, if you would, to Matthew 26 and 27, because that's where we're going to be looking this morning. As I said, Matthew indicates that they all rejected. They all rejected Jesus, every one of them. And so what I'd like to do today, counting each of us among the crowd of Jesus' most devout followers, I'd like us to look today at the variety of ways that Jesus' followers end up betraying him in that week. Today we're going to look at what I'm thinking of as little snapshots that give us a variety of portraits of betrayal during Holy Week. Yeah, Matthew chapter 26 is where we're going. I think that's on page 808 in the Bibles near you. Now, I'm going to make two assumptions about how we betray Jesus based on the fact that you're here this morning, or even if you're just tuned in. One is, my first assumption is that you and I are unlikely to betray Jesus in the same way that the chief priests and elders did. Matthew tells us that the chief priests and elders repeatedly conspired to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. And then they enlisted and bribed Judas, and then they sought false witnesses, and then they incited a violent mob to restore their preferred establishment. And I'm assuming that that's not you. It's not how you and I are likely to do this week. I'm also assuming that you're not likely to betray Jesus the way the Roman soldiers did. The Roman soldiers, they stripped him, and they spat on him, and they beat him, and they stripped his clothes, and they executed him, and then they divided up his clothing and shared it among themselves. My guess is that's not you either. Well done. You didn't betray Jesus in those ways. But I wonder if you and I might find a little more, family resemblance as we take a look at the portraits of Judas and Peter and even Pontius Pilate. So that's what we're going to look. Just a quick snapshot at each of these guys. We'll start with Judas. Judas is the kissing friend. You know the kind. Judas Iscariot has effectively become synonymous with betrayal. It's kind of the underhanded kind that isn't all the way on the up and up. Judas's kiss, you've heard used in various contexts. It's got the kiss of Judas. That's not a compliment. So here's part of what Matthew says about the way Judas navigated Holy Week. Let's hear it. This is in chapter 26, verse 14 through 16, but you can just listen to Zach read.
Then one of the 12, who was called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priest and said, "What will you give me if I betray him to you?" They paid him 30 pieces of silver, and from that moment he began to look for an opportunity to betray Jesus. When it was evening, he took his place among the 12, and while they were eating, he said, "Truly, I tell you, one of you will betray me." And they became greatly distressed again and said to him after one another, "Surely not I, Lord, surely not I." Jesus answered, "The one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me. The Son of Man goes as it is written of him, but woe to the one by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that one not to have been born." Judas, who betrayed him, said, "Surely not I, Rabbi." And he replied, "You have said so." Verse 47. While Jesus was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived, and with him was a large crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priest and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I will kiss is the man. Arrest him." At once he came up to Jesus and said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. Jesus said to him, "Friend, do what you are here to do."
That's the Judas brand of betrayal. Now, I am very intrigued with Judas after spending a little time with him this week. Why, you ask? And I'll tell you, because Matthew doesn't ascribe motives to Judas nearly so much as artists and theologians did for the next 2,000 years. Matthew reports how Judas functioned, but he doesn't explain why. Now, do you know why Judas betrayed Jesus? No. Now, there have been some interesting theories over the years. One is that Judas was greedy, financially greedy. And we get this notion from John, who reports, you may remember the time when Mary of Bethany spilt the expensive perfume on Jesus and then wiped it up with her hair, and Judas stands up and says, "Why couldn't these have been sold and given to the poor?" You know, that thing. Sounded good. But John, he thought that Judas kind of had been on the take all along. So John ascribes greed as Judas's motive to betray Jesus. And sure enough, there was a time where he had 30 pieces of silver in his hand. But there's some other interesting theories out there. I don't actually think that's the best one. Some folks have posited that Judas was a mole from the south the whole time with Jesus. He was a mole in this group of northerners. You see, Iscariot reflects the name of a city in the southern part of Israel called Kerioth. The rest of the 11 were from the north. Jesus and the 11 were from Nazareth. They were Nazarenes up from the northern part. But Judas was from the south. And some have suggested that Judas may have had kind of a rebel spirit and an inferiority complex, that he had tried to penetrate the Jesus group in order to derail the Jesus movement, and by doing so, perhaps reignite Southern pride just a little bit. Interesting, huh? Judas was inferiority complex guy. I don't know if that's the best one. There's another theory out there that Judas was a member of a group called the Zealots. Now, the Zealots were a group of fundamentalists in Israel, and they detested the milquetoast Jewish hierarchy, and they also detested the Roman occupation. The Zealots wanted to end both through violence, and so Judas thought, if I can just betray Jesus, if I can just derail him, perhaps the populace will take up arms and do away with the Roman Empire and with the Jewish hierarchy, and we can have pure Judaism again. That's the zealots. Some say Judas was one of the zealots. There's this other interesting theory that's just emerged in the last 30 years or so. In the early 1970s, there was the discovery of a Gnostic text in Egypt, and it was called the Gospel of Judas. It's written probably late in the 2nd century, maybe the 3rd century. But in the Gospel of Judas, Judas is portrayed as the most noble of all the disciples. And this theory posits that Judas was actually doing exactly what Jesus asked him to do by betraying him. That he was following Jesus' instructions reluctantly in order to speed up the arrest and the prosecution and the crucifixion, knowing that that was what was ahead for Jesus anyway. So Judas was the most noble of them all. Why did Judas betray Jesus? Can we know? Do you even know why you do the things you do that you know you oughtn't? The heart is deceptive above all else, Jeremiah says. Why? I don't know. John says that the devil entered Judas, as if that explains it. But I find that the devil uses all manner of motives, sometimes good ones. Good motives poorly expressed. I wonder what it is with Judas. Now, it kind of blew me away this week as I spent some time with Judas, that his story seems to get arrested at his betrayal instead of us being able to hear the rest of the story that Matthew actually tells about Judas. And this is such good news that I thought I better put it in right here. And that is, Matthew says that Judas came back. When Judas the betrayer saw that Jesus was condemned, he what? He repented. And he brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders. And then he said, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. What's it called when we say out loud, I have sinned? I think that's called a confession, isn't it? I got really intrigued this week with Judas because we've always kind of, I think, scapegoated him as the betrayer. But what the gospel says is that Judas repented and he confessed. And I'm wondering, isn't that the exact recipe we talk about for finding forgiveness with God? Isn't it John himself who said, well, let's read it together. If we confess our sins, he who is faithful and just will forgive us our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. Jesus said there would be great woe to those who betrayed him, and Judas suffered tremendous woe. Such woe that he ended his own life, as you know. But I've been wondering this week about what was the next posthumous conversation between Judas and Jesus. I wonder if it was one of full forgiveness and in total restoration and embrace. That Judas's woe that he felt over betraying Jesus got remedied at some point, even though Judas couldn't hold it during the time that he was experiencing the suffering that he was. I don't know, that's pretty exciting to me, the possibility that even Judas, the kisser, gets liberated at some point from the flaws and mistakes that he makes during Holy Week. Maybe you find yourself in that story, but maybe you need a different portrait to find yourself. Let's look at Peter. Peter the impetuous. Peter is probably a more palatable story for you. After all, the scripture tells us he's the rock. He's Jesus' main man. He's part of the inner circle. And so the way he functions likely is a little more admirable for us. Way to betray Jesus. But his betrayal is all the same. Peter, we know. We know some things about. Zach, why don't you read it? Read to us about Peter.
Then Jesus said to them, you will all become deserters because of me this night. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go ahead of you to Galilee. Peter said to him, though all become deserters because of you, I will never desert you. Jesus said to Peter, Truly, I tell you, this very night, before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times. Peter said to him, Even though I must die with you, I will not deny you. And so said all the disciples.
Peter's very next steps are the primitive biological flight, fight, flee. You know, the next thing he does, first he sleeps through his prayers, then he resorts to violence, and then he keeps a safe distance from Jesus. It's the way it unfolds. No, Lord, I will never deny you. You know what happened in the Garden of Gethsemane right after Jesus says this is he asks his disciples repeatedly, can you just stay awake and pray with me for an hour? Almost sounds like church, doesn't it? Can you just stay awake for 1 hour? And Peter couldn't, or he wouldn't. I think that was the day, that was the impetus to the t-shirts we see them all wearing later. Peter, James, and John. It says, Sons of Slumber. Just couldn't do it. Just couldn't stay awake during prayers. I'm so tired. It's so early or it's so late. I don't know. It's just too early. Just too late. I can't do it. And then when the crowds come with their weapons, you know what Peter does? He just anxiously reacts with his weapon. Because, you know, if we're going to fight, we're going to fight. And I can just imagine Jesus saying, Peter, have you learned nothing from me? Put that away. That's not how we do this. And then, of course, when things get really tense, Peter makes safe distance from anything the Lord might say or suggest to him. He lurks in the shadow, sits with the guards, it says. And hangs with the powerful in order maybe not to be vulnerable. I don't know. Whatever it is, he just feels like he needs to stay distant from Jesus during that Holy Week. The consequences could be big, being really close to Jesus this week. Well, like Judas, Matthew tells us that Peter also is full of regret. He's the woe he's carrying. And so Matthew tells us that when the cock crows, that Peter, he went out and he wept bitterly. And I'm wondering, is that an experience that you've ever had around your own betrayal? I'm not accusing you. But that feels kind of familiar to me. Regretting the things that I wish I hadn't done. The distance that I've kept between the Lord who loves me, lurking in the shadows, maybe among the powerful. And Peter went out. He wept bitterly. I'm reminded of a quote that I thought was Richard Rohr, but looking into it, I found it's actually another author that he must have been quoting, Nadia Bolz-Weber, who says, in the end, we aren't punished for our sins as much as we are punished by our sins. That feels true to me. Well, one more portrait. This is a portrait of Pilate, the preeminent politician. Pontius Pilate, he gets my pity. If anybody in the Gospels I have pity for is Pontius Pilate. In Matthew's Gospel, he apparently is a decent philosopher, but he's a simplistic and I think incompetent governor. And what I see is that Pilate, he knows Jesus doesn't deserve all this frothy bloodlust of the crowds, but Pilate is so committed to maintaining law and order that he cannot take a stand. Even when God in the flesh is in his face, in his living room, Pilate cannot stand to do what's right. Let's hear about Pilate.
The governor again said to them, "Which of the 2 do you want me to release for you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "Then what should I do with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" And all of them said, let him be crucified.
All of them said what?
Let him be crucified.
Who said that?
All of them.
Oh my gosh.
Then he turned to them and asked, what evil has he done? But they shouted all the more, let him be crucified. So when Pilate saw that he could do nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took some water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves. Then the people as a whole answered him, his blood be on us and our children. So he released Barabbas for them. And after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified.
Pontius Pilate's brand of betrayal, it seems to me, is not doing something he could do. It's not taking a stand to do the right thing and just letting the angry crowds have their way. Now, Pilate also, Matthew says, he just washed his hands of the matter. Whatever they do, I don't know. Whatever they do, the angry crowds. And that got to haunting me this week a little bit, because I started wondering, how many times recently have I just washed my hands of big problems in our society? War in Ukraine? Pretty far away. Not my problem. The homeless plight in Charlottesville. I suspect other people are taking care of that. You got a hand towel? And I've been wondering, is that Jesus' will for me that I just wash my hands of big problems in order to preserve my comfort? Maybe my safety, my security, my standing, whatever it may be. Is that what I prayed a moment ago when I said, thy kingdom come on earth? That I would figure out how to wash my hands of big problems that other people would have to take care of them? That seems to be the Pilate brand of betrayal. Now, let's tie this together. Wrap this up. Happy Holy Week. The question I want to leave with all of us today, all of us including us, is how are we most inclined to betray Jesus this week? Jesus said, all of you will betray me. I don't find that hard to believe. I'd like to stand up like the other disciples and say, no, not me. Yeah, that's what Jesus said. All of you will betray me. So the question is, will I betray Jesus like Judas? Will I trade him in for my own gain somehow? Will I betray him so that I can get my agenda forwarded somehow? Or will my betrayal this week look more like Peter? Will I keep my distance from him to make sure I don't have to be too close to anything he might say or anything he might ask of me? Save my skin, by being distant. Or will my betrayal look more like Pilate? Will I, when given the choice, opt to preserve societal homeostasis rather than taking a stand and doing something I could do to do the right thing to remedy the problems, even in the face of a reluctant crowd? How will I betray Jesus this week? Well, if history or biblical record holds true, a Christian like me is capable of all three in a single day. How will you betray Jesus this week? I don't know, I'm reminded, Jesus says, woe to the one who betrays. I know something about that. Maybe you do too. But here's my prayer. My prayer is that whatever mess you make of this week, however it is that you end up betraying the Lord, I pray that you might endure it like a hard-headed Peter. That you might be able to make it through the trauma and drama of Holy Week in order that just on the other side of it, you might hear the tender, stubborn Lord Jesus invite you to reconnect with the love of God again. So that you might, post-betrayal, encounter this question, do you love me? And that you might be given the chance to answer it. Yeah, I do. I'm not convinced that you're convinced, Jesus might say. Do you love me? And once more, you might go, yeah, I really do. For those of you who are still holding out, not sure whether you believe that or not, he might even ask you again, but do you love me? And that you and I might be able to persevere to that moment and be able to say, yeah, I really do. And friends, if that seems too far away, then I pray that you and I might re-anchor ourselves on the words that Jesus said at the beginning of Holy Week. When he raised his cup and he said, this is my blood of a new covenant. It is shed for the many for the remission of sins. You just hold on to that this week. In the midst of your betrayal, Jesus has already facilitated forgiveness. I'll drink to that.